Okay, so thank you for joining me here with Love for Humanity. And this week, what we're talking about is the unstable mind. Now, where does the unstable mind actually even come from? It actually came from a conversation I had last week with someone where we talked about how we think and how our brains work. And when we really looked closely at it, it actually showed us this bigger picture around what's actually happening in our minds. And I'll talk a little bit more about what came through when we did that. And it's really interesting because in all ways and all elements of how our brain works, it's actually designed to be unstable. And when we looked at that, and we're making this big joke about the fact that we have this unstable mind, which I was then prompted to write a book about it because there's so much really good content that we received from all of that. But really, at the end of the day, what we saw is our mind is designed to kind of ruin our life. It's just crazy when you realize that this is what our mind actually does. But it's interesting also too to look at the difference between the mind and the brain and also consciousness. And I haven't really I haven't gone on to, I don't get my information from anywhere other than what's downloaded and given to me. So I haven't gone on to Google or anything to get this information. But, you know, our brain is that area of our body that is it's sort of like the operating system for our body. And it's that physical element that, you know, creates all the chemical reactions and all the neurological processes that actually needs to happen. But the things, so you're not even really aware of the brain and how it works, but what you're aware of is the mind, and the mind is linked to thoughts. And the mind, it's not even really linked to consciousness, because consciousness is awareness, and you can actually be aware without being in your mind. So your mind is designed to keep you safe and to keep you protected so that you will survive. So if you think about it from that point of view, really, in essence, what all of us are actually doing is we're all living from a place of, I don't want to die, pretty much. So when we have that base awareness and that base knowing, wouldn't it then not be a surprise as to why it's very easy for us all to live in fear? Because fear is the thing that the mind thinks is going to keep us protected. It's going to keep us on high alert. And if we look at the world now and what's happening, so many people are dealing with mental illnesses and depression and anxiety and all these sorts of things, because that's how we've been designed, and that's how the mind is designed to be in fear of dying. So we have this real base, it's a base element, a base knowing, a base truth that I don't want to die and I will do anything to not die. So that's the mind's job. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how it does that and how it actually works, so you can then realize what it's doing when it's doing it. So pretty much what your mind is it's just like a computer. So you're born with this, if you want to call it, open files, this brain, this mind that has nothing in it that is ready to be filled. Of course, there's another element, which is the super consciousness, which actually has any other incarnation memories or so forth that are locked away. But this mind is ready, and this is why they say that children's minds are like a sponge, because they will take in absolutely anything that they see or experience through awareness and seeing exactly what's going on. The thing is that if you look at it, if we have a base knowing or awareness that I don't want to die, the way where even children see things and the way that they will learn is from a place of, how can I be safe? So this is where everything that people and children, but people will see, is that their learning will be all based around, I don't want to die. It's just crazy. So when children are learning, and also adults, but it's particularly when we're talking about children receiving information to be able to put into these computer files that are in their head, they've got it with a filter. There's a filter on it. And the filter is actually saying, well, will this help us to survive? Will this help us to survive? Will this help us to survive? And so it has what we call this perception, and I'm sure we've all heard of the concept of perceptions. So we all acknowledge and see things and learn things already from a pre-programmed perception that I don't want to die. So what happens is in our whole entire life, we have this computer program in our head, which is taking in information and storing it in our head. And when it stores it, it records it and it gets locked away into what we call our subconscious mind. So what happens is our subconscious mind will record everything that's happened in your life, but then link it up to the meaning as to how this is going to keep me safe and how is it going to help to protect me. So what happens is that whenever anything in your life comes up that's even vaguely related to anything that's already in your mind from a memory of this recording, it'll automatically link back to those perceptions or those thoughts of I'm not safe, and what can we do about it? And this is why we keep getting triggered over and over again with so many different elements, is because we still have this base belief that we are not safe and that we need to make sure that we stay safe. So everything that's in our head is literally a recording of everything that we've experienced in the past. So no wonder why we actually all live in the past, because that is all we have. Now, the thing is that we're taught that if you want to know something different or you want to learn something new, you need to think. But what's actually happening is when we go into thinking, we're going back into old computer programs, which actually means either, number one, we're repeating the same patterns and the same things that have happened from the past, or we're relating it back to something that's happened in the past, which is why we keep recreating the same experiences. So we have to look at the fact that our brain or our mind is just a computer, and it only has the information in it that is related to what's happened in the past. So if we want to move forward, we actually can't go into the mind to receive new information. We just can't do that because it's programmed to go back into the past. If we want new information, we can't actually think it. Now, I'm going to just show when we have thoughts. Now, so many of us have thoughts day in time, we have, I don't know how many, 35,000 thoughts a day. Now, every single thought that we have, well, not every single thought, but most of the thoughts that we have that we are thinking are all just thoughts from the past. So I know a lot of people who are struggling with their thoughts. The thoughts might be, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, people are out to get me, this is scary, fearful, whatever. If you have a look, it's actually obvious that those thoughts, or what those thoughts are actually doing. Now let's have a look at what those thoughts are actually doing. Those thoughts are actually going into the past to look at what it learned from the past to try and protect you for the future. But when you really look at it, and this is what I'm saying, our mind is actually designed to ruin our life, because it literally is just repeating old thoughts and old patterns to then create new experiences. But the thing is that we're not actually having new experiences at all, or even new thoughts, because they're all from the old computer program. So what then we have to acknowledge is that why do we actually keep going into these old thoughts? And if you think about most of the thoughts that we have, especially if you're wanting to do something new or have a different experience, those thoughts usually are quite negative. And half of them you don't even really notice are even there. So when you look at, okay, so why would we have negative thoughts? Wouldn't you think that negative thoughts would actually help us to move forward? And that's exactly what they've been designed to do. It's like if your mind tells you that you can't do this, you're helpless, you're hopeless, all that sort of thing, it actually thinks that that's actually inspiring you to do something different, to actually say, well, I'm going to prove those thoughts wrong. I'm going to use that thought to be better than the thought. But the thing is that we keep going back into the thoughts to try and make the thoughts better. which is using the old thoughts, which is actually saying, I can't do anything about it, because that's where we're operating from, is the fact that I don't know, so where can I get more information? And we're going back into thoughts to get more information. But at the end of the day, thoughts are just thoughts, and most of our thoughts are based around the past. So when we actually have these thoughts, and if you can be really totally aware of the thoughts that you have, if you can just realize that pretty much every thought that you have is just a thought, it doesn't have to be true, and also acknowledge that every thought that you have is also always from the past. So when we look at these awarenesses of the thoughts that come up, we're usually going into the spiral of listening to them, and then going down this like a rabbit hole of, I can't do anything about it. You know, the fears, especially what's going on at the moment, it's actually like sending us into deep spirals of depression, anxiety, fears, which will only happen if we listen to the thoughts. So what do we do if we can't listen to the thoughts, because the thoughts aren't the ones that are actually going to propel us forward? Is just to firstly acknowledge that a thought doesn't actually have to be true. It's just from the old computer program. So if you have that awareness that it's just from the old computer program, then you can then acknowledge them for what they are rather than listening to them. And the first thing that I've heard, especially listening to Eckhart Tolle's work, and he talks about, you know, how a thought is just a thought. It doesn't actually have to be true. It's just a thought. That's actually quite inspiring, because then if we can recognize that we're having a thought, and then if you say, okay, if that thought is actually not a very nice thought, you could just go, well, it's just a thought, and you don't actually have to listen to it, or you don't have to believe it. So it's actually quite freeing to realize that thoughts are just thoughts, and then thoughts are just from the old computer program, recreating the past for you, and you can actually have a decision and make a decision that that doesn't actually have to be true. But there's other elements around things. The thoughts are just the first thing that we're aware of from our mind. And so the first thing I'm going to say is, you don't actually have to listen to those thoughts, because if you're aware that they're just thoughts and that they're actually not true, well, why would we listen to them? And then that makes you more aware then that you can decide on what thoughts you want to have, and also what actual thoughts you want to make true. And I think that's where we get stuck, because we think that thoughts that we have are actually true, and we actually don't even acknowledge that we have, you know, half of them that we actually have. So it's so freeing to know that you can just observe the thoughts rather than making them true. The thing that we then get stuck on once we have an awareness of thoughts is identity. So that's another thing that the mind does, is it actually will link who you are to the thoughts and the experiences that you've had in the past. And so the mind just wants to know who it is. And really, at the end of the day, that's the essence again of its purpose here, is to say, or to help you to know who you actually are. And so what happens is it looks at, again, because it can only go into its computer program, it'll look at what's happened in the past and then label you with that as who you are, and create an identity. And that's a very subconscious process that it does, which you won't even be aware of until you get the chance to look at it. And you look at the awarenesses and the thought processes behind who you actually are, and you'll get a surprise as to how you've linked who you are to the processes that have actual things that have happened in your past and in the experiences in the past. So when we put an identity on ourselves, it's actually very difficult to move out of those identities, because if that's who you are, the mind will grab onto that awareness of that is who you are, and so that is who you will be in the current moment, in the future. It'll hold on to identity for as long as it can, because the mind thinks, and again, if you don't have an identity and you don't have a label on who you are, then it's then not going to be safe because it doesn't know how to show up in the world, and then it also then doesn't know what to do. So that's where it'll actually give you worst case scenarios, and I've been shown that it'll give you worst case scenarios so that you're prepared, so when the thing does happen, or the fear that comes up, so when it does happen you won't be caught unprepared. But what the mind hasn't really set itself up for, and what it is not aware of, is it doesn't understand law of attraction. So it's like whatever is going on in your mind will actually appear energetically in an external reality. And so this is where you can have 5 or 6 people in one room experiencing the same thing, yet to each person it'll appear different because of the programming that's in their mind. So we have to just be aware of all of these things, and what happens is that when you're aware of that's how the brain works and the mind works, what then happens is it opens you up to something else. And this is what else we can look into is, okay, so if we are just a mind that have thoughts, it has identity, it also has beliefs, which again are all old computer programs. Now, if you look at your mind as just a computer program, which I'm looking at a computer right now, it's like, okay, so if this computer program wants to get access to more information, we have to recognize that we will never think it. We will not get anything new from this computer program, because this computer program only has the information that I put into it. If we want new information, we need to get it from somewhere else. And this is where most people will then look external to them to try and get the answer. Yet we have another, what we call the second brain in our bodies, that gives us information around something else, which is not the mind. And that is intuition. That is your sixth sense. It's your knowing. And we have this inner knowing, which is a very embodied experience. It's not a thinking process at all. And we can get access to more information through this knowing that we have within us. And then also we do have in our brain, not in our mind, but in our brain, we actually have a gland called the pineal gland, which will actually bring in more information from other places, not just what you see and what you experience. So this is where we need to look at, well, if we look at how the mind's developed, what its job is and why it's there, we can actually see that it's incredibly unstable. It's designed to be that way. But it's also, if you look at from an incarnation perspective, isn't that part of why we're here, is to have experiences that we need to move through? And most of the experiences that we have are all in the mind. And this is why we're seeing a lot of mental illness and mental things coming up for people now, is because it needs to be acknowledged that everything is actually happening within our mind, not in the reality. And if we can start to see the difference through the unstable mind, because if the mind was literally meant to be supporting and helping us, it wouldn't be going into old programs and recreating the same old experiences. And, look at some of the most amazing, creative, innovative people who have walked on this planet. In most cases, because they have been incredibly creative and incredibly innovative in what they're doing, they end up going crazy in most cases, because the mind keeps wanting to go back into the past, and it keeps recreating the past stories around what it's actually trying to keep you safe, trying to keep you happy, trying to keep you peaceful, trying to make sure you don't die. But in actual fact, it's actually just going into past trauma and past pain and all that to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. But what happens is that we literally just are repeating the same things. And when we have an awareness that we're repeating the same things, it's quite confusing and frustrating. And until, now, if you're not aware of it, it will actually drive you crazy until you realize that the mind is designed to be unstable for you to move past it. The thing is that most people don't really know that, and don't really know that there is an option, but there is an option. So the first thing really is it's just to acknowledge that thoughts are just thoughts, identity is just an identity, beliefs are just beliefs, and it's all just been from the past. And really what most of us want to do is create different futures. So there needs to be another place that we need to go to get that information from. And at the end of the day, our mind is not designed to really help us. The mind is not really designed to help us to move forward. It's actually just designed to record the past. If we want to go back into our memory to retrieve something from the past, then you can go into thinking, then you can go into the mind to retrieve something from the past, because that's just going into memory. But that's all that the mind can actually do, is go back into its computer program or its memory to then create some kind of similar future. If we want to create a different future, and if we want to have different thoughts, different beliefs and different identity, we can't go into thinking about it. We actually need to go somewhere else to get that information. So I hope that actually makes a little bit more sense around how the mind works and what your mind, how your mind processes. We've got Peggy here actually, so I'm going to unmute you, Peggy, and see if you've got any questions about that or any comments around any of that. Are you there?
Okay, so
oh, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. I think I was still muted. Actually, I thought that was a really great explanation. It was very, very, made a lot of sense about things I was processing for myself this week with some issues I'm dealing with. And I think that that's good, because a lot of the same stuff triggers me all the time. And so for some reason, I was able to process through it and just follow the path of awarenesses that we talk about all the time with you. And so I think that did help. And so now, instead of saying, I can't do this, there are other options that I can do something.
Yeah, I think especially what you've just said is that it's just really good to be aware of it, and the awareness. So even if you go into awareness, it's not actually it's not the mind that is going into awareness, it's consciousness, and consciousness is a different thing. So when we go into consciousness, that expands our computer program, or access to a different computer program, which allows us to receive more information. And I think we're moving into a time where that's not weird or strange, because so many of us are having these experiences. But I think for us to move more into our consciousness and super consciousness, which is so much more information that we could ever access, we need to acknowledge what the unstable mind is doing. Because like you said, when you have experiences come up, and we do have, it's very, very powerful that we do have as part of our program to keep us safe, that fight or flight reactions, things that we need. But as time goes on, if we can recognize, and I've luckily had those experiences, especially over the last 12 months, where I've been able to see the mind go into fight or flight, or see the mind go into panic or fear or whatever. And again, if you can have the consciousness to do that, to be able to see it, that's not the mind, that's consciousness watching the mind. And when you realize it's pretty prehistoric the way our mind works. And I think I don't want to make it bad or wrong or anything like that. It's just that we now have another option. Whereas, I don't know, not that long ago, I wasn't aware that thoughts were just thoughts, and they can be debilitating, and they can really hold us back from everything because we think the thoughts are actually true. But then going deeper, and this is what I've really recognized recently, is that connection to identity is so powerful that when we have this strong connection to this identity, which is the program, which is in our mind, we can't see anything past that. And it's so freeing to be able to know that you can have another option. Like when we were talking before around, whether we go down the same pathway of the same jobs, or if we have a different job or whatever. Even our job is our identity in a lot of cases. Who we are is an identity. And once you release all those identities again in our mind and go into consciousness of what else is possible, what else can we be, and also even if you step into being nothing, that opens you up to everything. And it just makes you really realize, especially when we talk and we talk together and we have these amazing conversations that bring up awarenesses of how the mind is operating. I have not found anyone who isn't aware that they're not thinking things, that they're actually receiving information rather than thinking it, but where the mind has actually been helpful because of going back into these past programs. So we don't want to make it bad or wrong, but at the end of the day, it's like we're choosing another option, which is observing the mind rather than believing it or making it the only option, and then knowing we've got other options to receive information. And also what I've found when we do realize that we can tap into this intuition and which is the inner tuition, when we get access to more information through that, then we realize that we have a choice. And I think before we probably didn't realize that we had a choice. When these thoughts come up, I mean, I can't tell you how amazed I was and so happy to know that a thought is just a thought.
Okay.
A thought is just a thought. And when you recognize that a thought is just a thought and you have one, it can just be that. It's fantastic. And that's where you transcend into, again, what else is possible, to then see, well, if that's just a thought, what else is possible? And there's so many possibilities. So I think, when we look at the concept of people being stuck in bad situations in their mind, it's because they're believing it to be true. And don't know that they have other options. So it's kind of like saying, okay, so I'm going to go to the store and I'm only going to buy one type of chocolate bar, as opposed to I've got so many choices of chocolate bars. Which one do I want to choose today? It's not saying that one is better or worse than the other. It's just that, which one do I like? And I'm kind of liking receiving information from a higher consciousness or inner tuition or anything like that, because it's much more wiser than what I've seen the unstable mind is. And we can choose an option now. We're going into choice where we can have a choice as to how we want to think, which is so awesome. And I'm so excited that we do have this choice now. And I'd love to share to so many more people around how we can have a choice on how we think now. Whereas before, I don't think we really knew that we had one.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think that's good.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thank you for joining me today, Peggy, and anyone else who listens to the recording. And we'll see you guys again next week. We are holding these calls through Love for Humanity every week, where I'll share more information around what comes through, what we need to know about being humans on a planet, which most of the time we don't get access to that information, and what can help us to be better humans, and how we can help each other being together and working together and finding out more about ourselves and why things happen and all that sort of thing. I love going down the rabbit hole, don't you?
Yeah, there's always good information down there.
Love the rabbit hole. Well, and it's endless, right?
All right.
Thanks, Peggy, for joining me, and thanks everyone else. See you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.